and Furious here with the essentials. I mean, we're so excited about traveling. We're so excited about traveling down this road that we're coming more frequently with concepts and ideas to talk about. So there's so many films, so many times. I'm Chase Johnson Lynch, your hijacker, and I'm joined once again by Dan Halpern. Dan, you're gonna need a nickname, bros.
Oh boy, you got to come up with one for me.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? But I mean, we'll get to that one. So, today's topic is going to be, well, not sword and sandals because that's a whole different thing, but we call it sword and sorcery. So, the
Yep.
sword and sorcery films of the '80s is kind of like what we're taking a look at now. There was a plethora of them. We're not going to hit them all. We love it now, trifecta, our triptych, and so we made a selection and we'll say it up front so that way you'll know what to look forward to. So we're going to be talking about Sword and the Sorcerer, Krull, and Conan, which will cover the Barbarian and possibly the Destroyer. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, going down this dancing as well, right then.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little backstory. The whole genre was like created by, is it Robert E. Howard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who
He,
was
he was the pulp novelist.
pulp novelist that created Conan the Barbarian in 1932. And it
Mm.
first appeared, I think, in Weird Tales of that same year. And then the few years prior to that, he had created Cole the Conqueror, right?
Hmm.
Cole the Conqueror?
Yeah, Cole the Conqueror, played by the fantastic Kevin Sorbo, who did Hercules in the '80s and
Right.
everything. But he made that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess as far as like looking back at films, there were all those Hercules films, in the 1950s and 60s, right?
Steve Reeves, bro. Steve Reeves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then like you said before, man, it's like in the 1980s, like in 80, 81, it exploded. So you had the films we're going to highlight today, but other movies like Dragon Slayer, Excalibur, Heavy Metal, which was animated,
Hmm.
Beastmaster.
Love
Uh,
Beastmaster.
And an interesting thing I looked it up and wanted to see. I thought about Lord of the Rings, but the Lord of the Rings really doesn't fall into this bucket because
No.
the way people are sort of describing sword and sorcery is that seems like the stakes are more personal. They're in the moment. They're shorter quests. You
Yeah,
know,
but
it,
also the Hobbit trilogy kind of like brings more of an everyman quality, even though they were like Elven and of small stature. They needed warriors to fight with them, and
mm,
everything. But it wouldn't be within the same caliber. It's more of a magic caliber, and Lord of the Rings, I would think.
right. Well, they kind of also that somebody put that in a bucket which they called epic fantasy.
Oh, okay. Well, that yeah, yeah, yeah. I can
Because
do
these
that.
things are epics as opposed to probably the things that we're covering, which might tend to be, like they said, more personal, whether it's vendettas or revenge or however you might look at it. And then we're just going to go right into the first movie, Sword and Sorcery, which was directed by a guy named
Sword
Albert.
and sorcerer.
Sword and Sorcery, yeah, sorry. The Sword and Sorcerer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Directed by Albert
Pune.
Pune, who was quoted at one point or another as the new Ed Wood. I don't know how you feel
Yes.
about that.
Well,
Uh,
yes, because he did Captain America, and he also did Masters of the Universe. Yeah, yeah. So yes, he definitely was a go to guy.
right, right, right. On that sort of like the lower budget levels kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? And it was played by Lee Horsley, who, if you grew up like we did in the 1980s, everybody knew as Matt Houston, and Matt Houston was sort of kind of like a ripoff of Magnum PI back
Hmm.
then. But
Yeah.
I think you could speak more about the actual film itself.
Yeah. I mean, like as you said, this I was saying to you, it's like I loved this movie as a kid, but like there was something different about it, which I'll get to. But main thing about sword and sorcery films is that it was always about the magic sword. So with this particular story, it kind of like is in the middle. It's one of those immediate rest type of epics
Mm,
where Talon, played by Lee Horsey, is just kind of like an adventurer, a barbarian, a beast, a pirate, that kind of thing. But he has an enemy, which was Cromwell, right? and played by Richard Lynch. Everybody remembers Richard Lynch. He was always your go-to bad guy and everything. And what happened was Richard Lynch, when Talon was a boy, killed his parents in front of him, kind of like the Batman mythos. But that's when Talon had the sword. It was a tri-sword that actually shoots out each blade individually and
Mm.
stuff like that. So that's how Talon survived, but it also lost his fingers and everything. And that was his origin story. So now he's a man and he's got a mission, and that's to take down Cromwell. But Cromwell needs help, and he hires a witch to hire a demon, raise a demon, played by Richard Mall, Bull from Night Court.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And everything like that. And so he has his own personal demon, Cromwell does, and everything to ensure his success, that he won't be killed by this kid out for revenge. Now, what's great is that, so that's the sorcerer and that's the sword. But what's interesting about this particular story is, even though they gave us a flashback to his origin, he's like in the middle of his adventure in a way, because he just ends up coming to this town, and the town, being raided, and Cromwell wants the princess. So obviously he has to save the princess. Hey, we got that old trope, right? But he doesn't have that gathering of heroes concept. Like it's famous for Magnificent Seven or Guns of Navarone or whatever. Like the hero would need a team.
Mm.
Talon's team is already formed. And that was what was strange about this movie, because, when he has to rescue the princess and everything like that and take on the sorcerer, he just kind of like goes, down into the jails or whatever, and like his team is already captured and stuff. So we never really get to individually meet them, in a way and stuff. But Joe Regulabuto was his right hand man. Every hero always has one, right? But he also ended up doing a lot of law comedy TV shows, which was kind of funny. But cause coming down to the end is that so the team was already formed. Talon already had friends and enemies, and he was single minded to get this guy. But so what he needed to do was rescue the princess. And what happened is that in the big, one of the big epic battles, there's all of these warlords around, like in Game of Thrones,
Mm.
while Talon is crucified on a cross and stuff. And but they're like, yeah, should we jump in and stuff? And this whole big battle happens. Talon's free, and then he gets to go and take on the sorcerer and his enemy. Now, I'm not going to say how it all finished out, but what I just wanted to point out, as I pointed out to you, was it was a strange story structure. And I
Right.
think that's what made the story interesting to me, was because at the end, right, I could say this part, at the end, there was an announcement already in the credits for the next chapter. So obviously, when they wrote this story, it was probably like maybe a series of novels or whatever, blah blah blah. And they figured this one would be the most interesting to do or to start with,
Right.
but it's going to be in the middle. So you might get a prequel, or you might get a afterwards. But in that aspect, is I've never seen a film like that before. Because unfortunately, I was really excited being in the theater, waiting for the sequel, and it never came.
But there
So
was a sequel.
what?
There was a
No, there
sequel.
wasn't.
Yeah, it's called Tales of an Ancient Empire.
I told you they came up saying Tales of the Ancient Empire, but they never shot it.
Yeah, it's supposedly. I think they did it. It finally came out. I mean, I might be wrong, but I think it did come out. Look at live here, folks. Shock.
Go ahead. Before we move on, what happened? What did you find out about the sequel?
Let's see. Tales of Empire. It's like 2010.
Well, that's why, because I saw it as a kid in the 80s. So you mean they made us?
Except that yeah, here we go. Yeah, there he is, 2010, directed by Albert Payan with Kevin Sorbo and Michael Pare.
I have to hunt this down. So obviously, it wasn't what Matt Houston, but it was what Kevin Sorbo in the role, just as kind of like when we talk about Cull and everything else like that. Really, I am looking for that. Oh my God. Even I can learn something on this show.
Yeah, actually,
Right?
Lee Horsley's in it. He makes as talent. He makes a cameo.
He makes it. Oh my, dude! What am I doing on this show?
Blake, stop taping now. You know,
No, but still.
just
Oh
joking.
my God! Seriously?
And it was, it was made out. Let's see, the film was released in the United States by Lionsgate in January 2012, but it had its premiere in 2010.
Yeah. Wow. Tales of the Ancient Empire.
You know,
Finally, it was made. Okay, well, that's my joy.
I just made Chase's week,
You have.
maybe his month.
Because I don't care how bad that film is. It's just the fact that you don't realize in the theater, I was like, I can't wait to see the sequel to this, and it never came for me.
And it took 30 years. 30 years
Yeah.
later, it finally came out. You know.
All right, we're on time, so thank you very much, Dan. So take us down the road of Krull and the Flying Glaive.
Yeah, well, so Krull was like obviously I think one of the first like really big budget, sword and sorcery movies of the early 1980s. And it was directed actually by Peter Yates, who did Bullet, which we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the idea actually came from not so much the idea of the plot of Krull itself, but the idea of doing a fantasy movie, a sword and sorcery movie, came from actually the president of Columbia at the time in 1980. He wanted to do a genre movie.
Wow.
He didn't, which is unusual because it usually doesn't come from the studio. It's usually
so it's a location that wanted a film done.
Yeah, they wanted like, hey, probably because of Star Wars and everything that was going on back then, right?
Yeah.
And then so it finally got made. I mean, there's not really a ton of information about it. I mean, they built 23 sets on Pinewood at the 10th in Pinewood. It had the original title was The Dragons of Krull because the snake, right, was originally supposed to be a dragon.
Well, yeah, but wasn't it a spider? Didn't they turn it into a spider?
No, the spider was in that cave that they had to go. But and then there was a young Liam Neeson who was part of the gang.
Yes. And don't forget, you might not know him, but famous actor Robbie Coltrane.
Robbie Coltrane, I know who Robbie Coltrane is. Yeah,
and was the Cyclops? Was that Brendan Gleeson or
was he?
Well, I'm putting the Cyclops with that name, but I mean I know Brendan Gleeson's famous actor, but the Cyclops was a really cool character.
Right. And then the lead actor was this guy named Ken Marshall, who I thought was pretty decent, but he just sort of disappeared. Like the film.
He looked like he was from Soaps, didn't he?
He looked like sort of that generic good-looking actor that you sort of could be replaced by a million other generic good-looking actors that are sort of like have no real flavor. There's nothing really interesting about that guy. Like, okay, you're good, you're fine. Women will
just like the princess was an Olivia Dabo type, right?
Yeah, Lisette Anthony, who I think she kind of
her.
But she kind of disappeared off the face of Earth too. But the thing about Krull, which is interesting, is that I really liked it as a kid. Watching it again recently, I liked it. But look, it definitely is like a hodgepodge, right? It's like, okay, we got some Lord of the Rings here, and we got some Excalibur here, and we got a little bit of this here and a little bit of that here. And the thing which I was sort of thinking about is like, why the fuck did that Black Fortress have to move every day? They never tell you why.
But that was kind of interesting. Every time they
but they never. And it seems like the whole thing is just to go get the princess who's like in this moving building,
Yeah. Come on, you gotta. The writer was like, "Hey, it moves."
Yeah, it's cool. Although I did really actually like the interior, like the design of the set, inside the tower. It kind of looked almost like the interior, like some whale, a whale, something like that, which I really.
But the spider web,
that's my favorite scene.
The trap. I mean, that was amazing. It was really tense, and I think, like you just said, the film was just like one of your kind of like adventures, paint by numbers. because like when you told me like you didn't fancy Hawk the Slayer, if you think about it, those characters were interchangeable. Hawk and Crow, those the
Oh,
team, they
I
were kind of like
well,
interchangeable.
I would look. I would definitely agree with that. It's more of the execution of Hawk because Hawk
Yeah,
was just like the lead actor was just horrible, and also like when you look at Hawk the Slayer, but then when you look at Crow and you look at Conan, the one thing you realize with like sword and sorcery movies,
yeah,
is that they need budgets. It's really hard to pull off this genre. Like
yeah.
you could pull off a horror movie. You could pull off even a UFO movie, depending like a sci-fi movie, depending on how you angle it. But man, it's really hard.
But then, don't you think also you need characterization? Like I mean,
Well, that's the problem.
as I
That's
think about the team,
that's the
they were just
problem
kind
with
of
this movie
no. But
with Crow.
this is what I'm trying to say. You
Yeah.
need characterization too because the team, everybody needs a bit of a motivation, not just a look to them, which they need. But then because if you think about like playing Dungeons and Dragons or something like that,
Mhm.
you got a choice between the cleric, the monster, the barbarian, the thief. You know what I mean? So you could just put them in,
There was no real
dress them
much.
up.
There was no backstory really. There was no
Yeah,
origin story. That's the problem with this thing too. And the thing is, excuse me. The thing is that like you can tell that this came from like some idea from some big executive at a studio because like, well, these guys just aren't. They don't think that way. They just like, oh, this would be a cool idea for a movie. How about this scene and that scene, and throw a bunch of shit in and like get, you know what I mean? So I think
yeah,
what's stronger in this movie probably actually is the direction and the certain sequences because like Peter Yates is a good director, you
yeah.
know, which so it kind of saves part of it. I also like the part where they're like all on the horses and they're all like all of a sudden, it's like they're on the trails of fire, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
with the James Horner
yeah.
score. So there are parts that are visually really strong and stuff that I really like that I remembered. Like, okay, I remember that
Yeah, but
scene.
that
That
also felt a bit like Lord of the Rings. I mean, it was pre Lord of the Rings, but it felt like a retread of that. When Eowyn, played by Liv Tyler, was on the horses. You
oh
know what I
yeah,
mean?
absolutely. Even
Um,
over that giant bridge, like
yeah.
it's like you could tell, like, okay, the screenwriter must have read all the books and just like, I like this and I like
Hey,
that and I
that
like,
worked. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
that worked and
you
stuff like
know.
that.
But hey,
Well,
like
wait. You can't leave it without talking about the glaive, though. I mean, like because again, the main trope of these type of films is the magic sword, and
right.
so he actually had like kind of like a big shuriken,
Mhm.
funny shaped thing that he could sling. But that was the cool thing. But it was kind of like a frisbee.
And you know
you
what?
know.
That seems to come out of like kung fu movies, right? In a
Well,
way.
yeah, but that's what I mean. It's kind of like, well, how can we make this different? Instead of giving him a sword, we'll give him this frisbee that he throws.
Right. And then it's like,
Yeah,
you know.
but it
Um,
was all cool.
but then I think that just leads us into Conan because Conan, at least, like there is something where when you watch Conan, like you could tell it comes from a book or a series of books, right? You could tell
Mhm.
that it's like got a whole world built to it onto itself. You know what I
Well, wait
mean?
a minute. So before you go, let me do a little bit of history there because um, this was what you were saying about budget. We got these like kind of like give us a sword and sorcery, some magic, and we'll be happy. But this film was made by John Milius, who
Right.
was part of the Raging Bull gang of filmmakers,
Mm.
Scorsese and Lucas and all of them, right? So they were all friends. Everybody, if you read the book, Raging Bull's Easy Writers.
Mm.
But so this was John Milius's contribution, and I'm pretty sure you're going to get into the casting. But Schwarzenegger, who was Mr. Olympia, and he was big in that he was desperate to become a star, and he was getting up there. He was doing bit parts and getting into
Mm.
films and stuff like that. Did Hercules in New York, but you would have to agree that this was his moment. So I'm pretty sure I love it when you go down the casting road. So was there other people in mind for Conan?
I mean, for what I saw, there were just only two other people they probably considered, which seemed to be obvious. One of them was just too old, obviously Stallone.
You trying to tell me that like Schwarzenegger in that rivalry, he stole Conan from Stallone?
Yeah. I mean, Stallone would have just been like awful because, yeah. But you know, he's had big muscles, right? And then Charles Bronson.
I love hearing this part. This is my favorite part of the show.
Maybe
What the hell?
maybe Charles Bronson, like in the era of Magnificent Seven. You
Yeah,
know?
I know, but I mean, he was. I mean, you know, he's an urban vigilante. He's making his roles in that. But I
Right.
mean, like, who would think you would?
Well,
I mean,
because he's tough, you
this
know.
movie was about this guy's gonna walk around in a loincloth through the whole movie. Just
Well,
know the
I'm not
base.
saying that it
So
was
why
smart.
would you look in?
There was not smart casting choices, and it was like really the only casting choice if you think about it today. And today the guy would be played by The Rock, right? You know, so.
Oh hell yeah! But Rock tried it when he did Scorpion King, didn't he? You
Mhm.
know, that was really like, hey, I can do Conan. And he also did Hercules. So it's like, so Rock got his revenge on that. But so Schwarzenegger as Conan, they knew that he couldn't really, you know, speak English very well, you know, no matter how many dialect coaches that he had. So Milius's choice to go minimalistic with the dialogue, focus on the score and the action set pieces and stuff like that. And then figure, look, if you want to hear somebody, I'll give you James Earl Jones.
Exactly.
You know?
But the thing is, look, when you watch Schwarzenegger, you know, you go like, you know, even this first movie, it's like you realize, like, yeah, this guy kind of can't really talk that much, and he's kind of goony looking at this, whatever. But he's still like a fucking movie star, right? Because like he still like has those magnetic. He's still, even when he's walking through scenes, he's got that look. Like he might give somebody just a quick glance or look, and it's like it says it all. Like he just naturally had it. You know, it wasn't like either you got that or you don't, right? And so he had it obviously in mega doses. You know, and you know, look, he was able to, you know, the movie was a giant hit. He became a movie star.
So then came the sequel, the inevitable sequel, Conan the Destroyer, which I happen to think is my favorite. I look at Conan.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen Conan.
Well, I look at Conan the Destroyer more than I look at the Barbarian, and what I would just say about it is that because they were so ultra serious with Conan, right? They got a new director, and you know, they did Destroyer, and they just went straight comedy. So Conan, you know, he has his team, right? Which we didn't really see in the first film. So they were played by different actors. So, you know, that's where you get Mako and all that, Tracy Walter. But then they have a mission to take a princess, you know, pretty much to another castle, which they don't know they're taking her to death. So that princess is Olivia Dabo, and she has a warrior sidekick bodyguard played by the hugely tall Wilt Chamberlain, right? And everything. And this was really, I thought it was excellent, and had a lot of comic set pieces, a lot of action pieces, but pretty much, you know, it's about betrayal and everything. And, you know, and Conan faces off against a god, you know, and everything like that. But what was funny is that it ends with that kind of Star Wars ending, you know, like when they go up to get their, you know, medals. And, you know, and she wants Conan to stay, you know, to be the king. And he's like, I will go and have my own kingdom. Take all my friends, including Grace Jones. And then everybody's like, wait, where you going? And I'm going on the road alone. And, you know, and we get there again in the end where Conan is brooding on the throne, where they're showing us he will soon be King Conan. Now, this was another thing that we never got, right? And so what they did is that somebody in high places decided that, you know, we want to do a third film, but we don't want to do King Conan, so we don't actually know what to do. So then
we'll do
Red Sonja.
Red Sonja.
And guess what? We'll get Sylvester Stallone's girlfriend, Bridget Nielsen, and put her in the role. Now, this rivalry between those two, boy, I gotta tell you, it's fantastic. But I love Red Sonja as well. What did you think of Red Sonja?
I haven't. That's the thing, is I only watched Conan. I haven't seen Red Sonja in like years and years, man.
Man, Red Sonja is definitely worth a watch. You know, because it had Ernie Reyes Jr. and I love the Kung Fu antics of Vernon Reyes Jr. from Last Dragon and all that, but he's in this film, and it's not Paul Beitel, but he's this English foreign, English actor and everything like that. But that was just another great film, and Conan just shows up as the hero. And I mean, well, he's not. First of all, he's not Conan. He's Conan-like. So it's her story, but she's often being rescued by this, this prince who is buff guy, and I am, and everything like that. And I think this is the movie that actually made him a star, because him coming down the steps, the camera just starts at his feet, and he comes down, to again rescue her from the situation, because that's what they did at those times, even though she's the star of the movie, she can't help herself. Hollywood and everything like that. But just like, it's like who could win between the two of us, and we would never know, So that was cool. But last thing I'll say to that is Kull the Conqueror. Now, that again was supposed to be Conan 3, and now Arnold is the star. So he's like, I don't need these freaking movies anymore, and he goes off and try and do something else, comedy. And so they bring in Kevin Sorbo, and I think Kull was made after he did Hercules, wasn't it? It was between Hercules and Andromeda.
97.
So it still could be between Hercules and Andromeda, because I mean, Hercules was definitely in the 90s. So, and I don't know anything about that movie. I just only know the name, and that it starred my man Kevin Sorbo and stuff.
Oh, so you've never seen Kull, huh?
No, I've seen it. I've seen it. I just, like you, I've seen it once.
You don't know anything.
You know what I mean? But I just thought we had to mention it because, it was in the package. But, so, these films I just think are fantastic, and it's funny, there are those retread films, like Deathstalker, where that had a trilogy, and all those films, Tour from the Future, with Reb Brown, who was Captain America on television, right? So Lady Hawk, there was so many different and fantastic films. I'm a huge fan of this genre, and trying to ease it down to just 3, that was the hardest part I felt this time around. Is like, but fantastic films. So I'm surprised though, because usually you are the man on casting and stuff like that. There were
not really. I mean, the interesting thing here is how the guy who plays Subutai, the sidekick in the first one.
In Conan Barbarian, yeah.
So he was played by this surfer named Jerry Lopez.
Oh my God! Please tell me he was Asian though.
Well, Jerry Lopez, no, he was Jerry. He was a famous surfer that John Milius knew from his surfing movie in the 70s, and his voice was so not right that they dubbed his voice is completely dubbed in the movie.
I can't believe it, man. And that's like blackface. Because he's playing like a Hun, he looks like Genghis Khan. So I mean, obviously they just did him up, with the long hair and the mustache and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And then as far as directors, at certain points they were considering Oliver Stone. They were considering Ridley Scott.
Yeah, that would have been good. Those good choices there.
The over 49 sets were built. Then that thing, the Temple of Set, which was the giant temple with the staircase, which I was looked at and I'm like, is that like a real location? But that was completely built. They shot it for 5 months in Spain.
So what about the snake?
What do you mean? What about the snake?
We're talking about Conan the Barbarian, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean,
what about the freaking huge snake? What do you mean? What about the snake? The huge white snake.
I didn't get to that part yet, dude. In my research.
Sorry.
I can definitely tell you that there was a location called Shadizar, right?
Yeah.
And it was actually filmed on a set that was built in 1970 for a Jim Brown movie called El Condor.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I know them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what I did really appreciate about this film, though, is that when you look at it, again, we're talking about like this sort of kind of distinct world, is that you really kind of did feel like all these, that like all the different like towns or cities he visited, they all had their own kind of more unique culture, or
Hmm.
that all the priests, there was like their own like religion. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of thought and care that like, and maybe that all came out of the books, right? There was a
Yeah.
lot of care that went into this world, as opposed to Crawl, where it's sort of like, here's, let's throw this bunch of shit in there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, world construction is everything, especially in a fantasy film. But then
Exactly.
again, it depends on the director when it comes down to the material, because he could just get like some production design, make me a set. It looks like it's in the past. We're shooting in the woods, hey. But then like if you actually think about, like you just said, about like the marketplaces or the villages and all of that other kind of stuff. What can we do to really bring this out and everything? And I don't think a lot of them actually did that when they worked for a paycheck like an Albert Pune. But
Okay, so I can
yeah.
read you about, here's about the snake. This is off Wikipedia. They built a 36-foot long mechanical snake for the fight scene in the Tower of Serpents. The snake's body had a diameter of 2.5 feet. Its head
Yeah.
was 2.5 feet long, 2 feet wide. Its skeleton was made from an duralium, an alloy used
Mm,
in aircraft frames, and its skin was vulcanized foam rubber, controlled by
wow.
steel cables and hydraulics. The snake could exert a force between 3.5 and 9 tons.
Wow.
So another two
Wow.
snakes of the same dimensions were made, one for stationary shots and one for decapitation by Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
So,
Dude, I'm
so
telling you, it's awesome scene
yeah,
and
you
everything.
know,
And I hate snakes.
so
So that,
combination of puppetry and animatronics, like a lot of
yeah.
practical effects are.
Well, listen, I know it wasn't a real snake, but I just hate snakes. So either way, that brings us down to the end there. But like, once again,
Next
it
week
was
we're going to be
great.
talking about snakes on the plane, right?
No,
So
no, never. Or anaconda. No,
no,
never.
no snake movie.
But it was great going down the well here with you. And
Yep.
please, we invite people, like and subscribe. I would like to say to you, I was talking to a good friend of mine. I'm going to name drop him, Roger De Silva, who said to me, "Hey, you think you want to look at Soul Man with C. Thomas Howell?" And I said, "Hell no," but then I will, because it's
We'll,
cringeworthy.
we'll
And
we'll
I
do
think,
that down the road, man.
yeah, so I think I'm asking you, the audience, if you know of any films that you feel are ultra cringeworthy, please pass them along, so that way we could do a special on cringeworthy films. So
Hmm.
that's what I'm asking for people out there. Is that if you like this discussion and you want to go down the cringeworthy route, let's just say see Thomas Howell in blackface for the whole movie. I'll give it to you there.
Bad,
Right?
bad.
Cringeworthy. So I'm Chase Johnson, the hijacker. That's my man Dan Halpern. He needs a nickname as well. So
Give me one. I'll take one. Anyone.
thank you. So all right, you've been watching The Essentials, and we're closing the book on this particular episode. And until next time, when we open the books again,
Ah.
boom. See, look at that. You like that, huh?